I turned in my resignation, and the CEO came knocking on my door. I accept you're leaving, but I refuse to lose you. Christopher Vance closed the office door for the last time after 5 years of dedicating his life to that company. His resignation letter lay on the CEO's desk, and he knew he would never return there again. The disappointment weighed on his chest like a stone, especially because the betrayal came from someone he least expected. That rainy Monday morning, he had discovered that Catherine Sterling, the CEO he trusted blindly, had secretly approved the layoff of his entire team to cut costs. 15 employees who had worked with him for years would be fired on Friday, and she hadn't said a single word about it. Christopher always believed Catherine was different from other executives. She had risen in the company through her own merit, was fair, dedicated, and seemed genuinely concerned about the employees. That's why the discovery hurt so much. For 3 years they had worked side by side on major projects, developing a professional partnership he considered exemplary. The news reached him through an email mistakenly sent by the Human Resources Department. A list with the names of his 15 best employees accompanied by the note, "Layoffs approved by the CEO. Execution on Friday." Christopher read that 3 times before he could process the information. His first reaction was to look for Catherine immediately. Maybe there was a misunderstanding, an explanation that made sense. But when he got to her office, he found the door closed and the assistant informing him she was in a strategic meeting all day. Christopher waited. He waited 2 hours sitting outside, watching executives enter and leave the room, while his team continued working normally downstairs, unaware that their days at the company were numbered. When Catherine finally came out of the meeting, around 6 in the evening, Christopher stood up determined to clarify the situation. But before he could speak, she quickly walked past him, only whispering a, "We'll talk tomorrow, Christopher," without even looking him in the eyes. At that moment he knew it was true. Christopher spent the whole night awake, staring at the bedroom ceiling. He thought about every project they had developed together, every meeting where she praised the team's work, every time she said employees were the company's most important asset. It all suddenly seemed like a lie. The next morning, he typed his resignation letter. It wasn't just a departure from the company. It was the end of a professional dream he had nurtured for years. Christopher believed he was building something solid, a career based on values and competence. Discovering that everything could be discarded so easily broke something inside him. The letter was brief and direct. He didn't mention the reasons for leaving, made no accusations, didn't express his disappointment. He simply stated that he was resigning from his position as project manager and that his last day would be that same one. Christopher printed the letter, placed it on Catherine's desk when she wasn't there, packed his belongings in a box, and left. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The reaction at the company was immediate. Christopher was respected not only for his technical competence, but for the way he treated people. He knew every employee by name, remembered birthdays, and was always available to help with both professional and personal problems. His sudden departure sparked comments and speculation throughout all the hallways. Catherine received the news during a video conference with international investors. Her assistant discreetly entered the room and placed the letter on the table. When Catherine read the content, her concentration completely evaporated. She tried to continue the meeting, but Christopher's words echoed in her mind. After 15 minutes of vague and distracted answers, she asked to reschedule the meeting. Alone in her office, Catherine held the letter with trembling hands. She knew exactly why Christopher had resigned, and it destroyed her inside. For 2 months she had fought against the board of directors to prevent those layoffs. Sleepless nights, tense meetings, detailed reports showing alternatives. But in the end, she was pressured to choose. Either fire 15 employees from Christopher's team, or be replaced by someone who would make even bigger cuts. It was the hardest decision of her career. Catherine spent weeks trying to find an alternative, renegotiating contracts, cutting other costs, proposing salary reductions for the executive team. But the board was unyielding. The company needed to show fiscal discipline to the international investors, and Christopher's team, despite its excellence, was seen as an unnecessary luxury in times of restraint. What hurt the most was knowing that Christopher would interpret it as betrayal. They had worked together on practically every major project over the past 3 years. Catherine trusted his judgment more than that of any other employee. Their weekly meetings had become the highlight of her week, not just for the quality of the ideas he presented, but for the honest and direct way they talked. Catherine tried to call Christopher that afternoon, but he didn't answer. She tried to send messages, but got no response. As the hours passed, she realized she had lost not only an excellent employee, but someone whose opinion and presence had become essential in her life. That night, Catherine stayed at the office until late, trying to find a way to reverse the situation. She reviewed the company's numbers hundreds of times, looking for some alternative that might have been overlooked. She called 3 board members, trying to renegotiate the layoffs, but all were inflexible. The decision was made and would be carried out on Friday. Around 10 at night, it started to rain. Catherine looked out the window of her office on the 22nd floor and saw the streets of New York City fill with people running for cover. Rain always made her think of change, of new beginnings. That's when she made a decision that would change everything. She grabbed her car keys and left the company. On the way to Christopher's house, Catherine mentally rehearsed what she would say. She needed to explain the situation, make him understand that this hadn't been an easy choice. But above all, she needed him to know a truth she had been holding on to for 2 years. She was in love with him. The rain grew stronger when she arrived at the neighborhood where Christopher lived. It was a middle-class area on the Upper East Side, with simple but well-kept houses. Catherine had been there only once, at a team-building party he had organized for the staff the previous year. She remembered how he had made sure everyone felt welcome, personally preparing the snacks and organizing games to break the ice among employees from different departments. When she reached his front door, Catherine hesitated. She was completely soaked, her red blouse clinging to her body and her hair dripping water. Maybe this was crazy. Maybe she should have called first, scheduled a more formal meeting. But something inside her said that if she didn't speak up now, she might never have the courage again. Christopher was at home trying to decide what to do with his career. He had received 2 job offers in recent months, but had always turned them down out of loyalty to the company. Now he regretted not having at least considered the possibilities. He was reviewing your resume on the computer when he heard the doorbell. When he opened the door and saw Catherine standing there, soaking wet, shivering from the cold, his first reaction was total surprise. She looked different from how he had always seen her at the office. Vulnerable, human, with red eyes as if she had been crying. "Catherine, what are you doing here?" Christopher asked, genuinely confused. "I needed to talk to you," she said, her voice choked. "I know you don't want to see me right now, but please, give me 5 minutes." Christopher stood in the doorway, processing the situation. Part of him wanted to close the door and pretend this conversation never happened, but another, larger part was curious to understand what could have brought the company's CEO to his house on a rainy Tuesday night. "Come in," he finally said, stepping aside from the door. "Oh, you're soaked." Catherine entered the small, cozy living room. It was exactly as she had imagined Christopher's home would be. Books neatly arranged on shelves, well-tended plants, family photos on the walls. Everything reflected his personality. Organized, warm, genuine. "Can I get you a towel? Some coffee?" Christopher asked, keeping a formal tone. "Christopher," Catherine began, ignoring the offer, "I accept your resignation from the company. I understand your reasons and respect your decision, but I don't accept losing you as a person." Christopher stopped in the middle of the room, her words echoing in his mind. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about you being the most principled person I've met in 20 years of my career," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm talking about these 3 years working with you being the best of my professional life. And I'm talking about being in love with you for 2 years, but never having the courage to say it, because I was afraid it might hurt our partnership." The silence that followed seemed to last an eternity. Christopher looked at Catherine as if seeing her for the first time. The strong, decisive woman who ran a company of 500 employees was standing there, vulnerable, confessing feelings he never imagined existed. "Catherine," Christopher began slowly, "you fired my entire team. 15 people who trusted me, who worked hard for years. How do you expect me to react to that?" "I didn't want to do it," she replied quickly. "You don't understand, Christopher. I fought against that decision for 2 months. The board gave me an ultimatum. Either I fired 15 employees from your team, or they would replace me with someone who would make even bigger cuts." Christopher shook his head, incredulous. "And you thought it was better not to tell me anything? To let me find out by chance?" "I was trying to find an alternative," Catherine said, stepping closer to him. "Every night for the last 8 weeks, I stayed late at the office, looking for a way to avoid those layoffs. I renegotiated contracts, cut my own salary in half, proposed eliminating positions in other areas, but it wasn't enough." "Why didn't you tell me?" Christopher asked, his anger beginning to mix with confusion. "Because you would have tried to convince me to fight even harder. And I was already doing everything I could," she replied. "And because I knew you would do exactly what you did, resign in protest, and I didn't want to lose you too." Christopher sat down on the sofa, trying to process all the information. "So you preferred to deceive me?" "I preferred to protect you from a decision that wasn't yours to make," Catherine said, sitting in the armchair beside the sofa. "Christopher, if I had told you about the board's pressure, you would have blamed yourself for not being able to save your team. I know you. I know how you take responsibility for everything and everyone." There was truth in those words, and Christopher knew it. He would have indeed felt guilty for not finding a solution. It's always been this way since childhood. If something went wrong with people he considered his responsibility, he took the blame upon himself. "And what about what you just said?" Christopher asked, avoiding looking directly at her. "About being in love with me?" Catherine took a deep breath before answering. "It's true. It started 2 years ago, at that meeting about the expansion project. You were explaining your ideas to the team, and I saw the way everyone listened to you with attention and respect. It wasn't fear or obligation, it was genuine admiration. In that moment I realized you were the kind of leader I always wanted to be." Christopher finally looked at her. Catherine's hair was still wet, a few droplets running down her face. There was something different in her eyes, a sincerity he rarely saw in the corporate environment. "And then?" he asked. "Then I started noticing small things, like how you always remembered when someone was going through personal difficulties, how you shared the credit for successes with the whole team, but took sole responsibility for failures, how you could be firm in decisions without ever being cruel to people." Catherine paused, wiping a tear that began to trickle down. "I started falling in love with who you are, Christopher, not just the competent professional, but the man who can be fair and kind at the same time." Christopher stood up and walked to the window, watching the rain that continued to fall. "You know this changes everything, right?" "I know," she replied. "But I needed you to know the truth before it was too late." "And what do you expect to happen now?" Christopher asked, turning to face her. "I don't expect anything," Catherine said, standing up as well. "I just wanted you to know that those layoffs weren't an easy choice for me, and that you mean much more to me than just an exceptional employee." Christopher came closer to her. There was something about Catherine's vulnerability that touched a part of him that had been closed off for years. Since the divorce 3 years ago, he had focused only on work, avoiding deeper relationships. "And your team?" he asked. "What's going to happen to them?" "The layoffs haven't been finalized yet," Catherine said, a glimmer of hope appearing in her eyes. "The board gave me until Friday to carry out the layoffs, but the paperwork hasn't been signed yet." Christopher looked at her carefully. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we still have 3 days to find an alternative," she replied. "If you come back to the company, if we work together, maybe we can convince the board that there's another way." "Catherine," Christopher said slowly, "are you offering me my job back?" "No," she replied, surprising him. "I'm offering you a promotion, Director of Operations. You'd have the authority to restructure the company's processes, including your team. With that position, you could present an alternative plan to the board." Christopher was silent for a long moment. The offer was tempting, but there was something else at stake now. Catherine's feelings, declared so sincerely, completely changed the dynamic between them. "And what about what you said?" About being in love with me? He asked. That has nothing to do with the professional offer, Catherine said firmly. If you accept coming back, it will be because it's the best decision for the company and your team. My personal feelings are set aside. And what if I say I feel something for you too? Christopher asked, surprising himself with his honesty. Catherine looked at him in astonishment. You do? I've always admired your intelligence and determination, Christopher said. But in recent months I started noticing different things, like how you genuinely care about the well-being of employees, even when it goes against your interests. How do you listen to opinions contrary to yours without getting offended? How do you manage to be a strong leader without losing your humanity? Catherine felt her heart race. Christopher, but that complicates things, he continued. If we start a relationship, what happens to our professional partnership? How will the employees react? How will the board interpret my decisions? I don't know, Catherine admitted. All I know is that having you far away is worse than facing any complication. Christopher moved closer to her. You're trembling. It's the cold, she said, though she knew it was more than that. Let me get you a towel, he said, heading to the bathroom. When he came back with a warm towel, Christopher handed it to Catherine carefully. For a moment, their hands touched, and both felt an electricity that went far beyond the professional. Catherine, Christopher said softly, if I agree to come back, I need some conditions. What are they? First, total transparency. No hidden decisions, no matter how hard they are. Second, real autonomy to restructure the processes. Third, a 6-month deadline to prove there's a more efficient model that doesn't require layoffs. I accept all of them, she said without hesitation. And a fourth condition, Christopher added. We both need to have a serious conversation about our feelings. Not today, not now, but soon. Because if we're going to work together again, I need to know where we stand. Catherine smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. I accept that one too. Then I'll come back, Christopher said. But not for you, for my team. They don't deserve to lose their jobs because of the board's political games. I understand, Catherine said, though there was a hint of disappointment in her voice. And Catherine, Christopher added, moving closer to her, thank you for coming here. I know it wasn't easy. It was the hardest and most necessary thing I've ever done, she replied. They stood looking at each other for a moment, feeling the tension of what was to come. 3 days to save 15 jobs, 3 days to prove there were alternatives, 3 days to decide the future, not just professional, but personal for both of them. I'll take you home, Christopher said. You can't drive in this rain. My car is here, Catherine protested. I'll pick it up early tomorrow and bring it to the office, he insisted. Right now, you need to dry off and rest. Tomorrow we start a war. During the drive to Catherine's apartment, they talked about initial strategies. Christopher already had some ideas on how to restructure the processes to increase efficiency without reducing staff. Catherine knew the specific concerns of each board member and knew how to approach each of them. When they arrived at the luxurious building where Catherine lived, she hesitated before getting out of the car. Christopher, she said, no matter what happens in the next few days, I want you to know that this conversation changed everything for me. I'll never make important decisions again without considering the impact on people. And I'll never judge a situation again without knowing all the facts, he replied. Catherine got out of the car and waved before entering the building. Christopher waited until he saw her get into the elevator before driving away. On the way back home, he wondered if he had made the right decision. Going back to the company meant not only facing the professional challenge of saving his team, but also dealing with feelings he had kept buried for months. The next morning, Christopher arrived early at the office. He had decided to talk to his team before anything else. They deserved to know the truth about the situation and about their chances of staying at the company. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing, the meeting with the team was one of the hardest in Christopher's career. 15 people who trusted him, who had built their lives around those jobs, listened in silence as he explained the situation. There were tears, outrage, and surprisingly, determination. If we have 3 days to prove our worth, then we'll use every minute, said Emily, the senior analyst who had been with the company for 8 years. What's the plan? Christopher smiled, remembering why he loved working with those people so much. The plan is to revolutionize how this company operates. We're going to show the board that innovation and efficiency don't come from cutting people, but from empowering the ones already here. Over the next few hours, Christopher and his team worked on developing a project that would completely change the company's operational processes. They identified redundancies, proposed automations, created productivity monitoring systems, and designed a management model that could be replicated across all branches. Catherine showed up at the department around 3 in the afternoon. Christopher presented the initial ideas, and she was impressed with what they had managed to develop in such a short time. "This is brilliant," she said, analyzing the graphs on the screen. "But we need concrete data to impress the board. Financial projections, implementation timelines, risk analysis. We're already working on that," said David, the team's data specialist. "By tomorrow, we'll have solid numbers." Catherine and Christopher exchanged glances, remembering their conversation from the night before. There was a tension in the air that hadn't existed before, a mutual awareness of unresolved feelings, but both forced themselves to stay professionally focused. "I need to schedule one-on-one meetings with each member of the board," Catherine said. "It's best to prepare them before the official presentation." "Good idea," Christopher agreed. "Who do you think will be the hardest to convince?" "Preston Harrington," she replied without hesitation. "He's the most conservative and fixated on cutting costs. For him, laying people off is always the first option." "And the easiest?" "Probably Susan Hayes. She understands that motivated people produce more than people worried about layoffs." Christopher spent the rest of the afternoon creating customized versions of the presentation for each board member, highlighting the points that would most interest each one. It was meticulous work, but necessary. By 8 o'clock at night, most of the team had gone home, leaving only Christopher and Catherine in the office. They were reviewing the final details when she commented, "Have you always worked like this, with this total dedication?" "Since I was a kid," Christopher replied. "My mother always said that if something is worth doing, it's worth doing well." "Tell me about your family," Catherine said, seizing the moment's pause. Christopher hesitated. He didn't usually talk about his personal life at work, but the current situation had broken many conventional barriers. "I come from a simple family. My dad was a mechanic, my mum a teacher. They taught me that hard work and honesty are the only things that really matter in life." "And your marriage?" Catherine asked softly. "It ended 3 years ago. Michelle said I loved my job more than I loved her. Maybe she was right." "Do you regret it?" Christopher thought for a moment. "Not the end of the marriage, but I do regret using work as an excuse to avoid personal problems. It's easier to solve spreadsheets than relationships." Catherine smiled sadly. "I do the same thing. That's why I'm a CEO at 32, but have never had a relationship last more than 6 months." "Why?" Christopher asked. "Because I've always put my career first. And because I learned early on that depending on someone is dangerous." "What do you mean?" Catherine was silent for a moment, clearly debating internally whether she should share something so personal. "My father abandoned us when I was 12, she finally said. "Not for another woman, not because of financial problems. He simply decided he didn't want the responsibility of a family anymore. My mother got sick soon after, and I had to take care of her and my younger brother." Christopher felt a tightening in his chest. "I'm sorry. I learned that the only person I can fully trust is myself. That's why it's so hard for me to accept help or admit weaknesses. And that's why you didn't tell me about the layoffs?" "Exactly. Admitting I was losing a battle against the board meant admitting I couldn't protect the people who depended on me." Christopher stepped closer to the table where she was sitting. "Catherine, you don't have to carry everything alone." "I know that now," she said, looking directly at him. "Last night, when I decided to go to your place, was the first time in 20 years I chose to be vulnerable with someone." "And how do you feel?" "Terrified and relieved at the same time." They looked at each other for a moment, the tension between them almost palpable. Christopher felt the urge to move closer, maybe touch her face, but he held back. There was too much at stake to complicate things with romantic impulses. "We should head home," he finally said. "Tomorrow will be a long day." "You're right," Catherine agreed, starting to gather the papers. "Can I give you a ride?" Christopher offered. "Thanks, but my driver is already waiting for me." When they reached the parking lot, Catherine hesitated before getting into the car. "Christopher, about our conversation last night, about my feelings." "You don't need to explain anything," he interrupted. "I want you to know I didn't say that to pressure you into coming back. It was just honesty." "I know," Christopher said softly, "and I'm grateful for it." "Good night, then." "Good night, Catherine." The second day was even more intense. Christopher and his team finalized the financial projections, which showed that the new operational model could increase productivity by 25% in the first year. The numbers were impressive, but Christopher knew that numbers alone wouldn't convince the board. Catherine spent the day in one-on-one meetings with the board members. The first one, with Susan Hayes, was positive. She showed interest in the innovation proposals and promised support at the official meeting. The second, with Dr. Stephen Foster, was neutral. He was willing to listen but wanted to see more specific technical details. The meeting with Preston Harrington was a disaster. "Catherine, you're complicating a simple situation," he said, adjusting his glasses as he flipped through the preliminary documents. "We have clear orders from the lead investors to cut operating costs by 15%. Layoffs are the quickest way to achieve that goal. But the numbers show we can achieve a much bigger reduction by keeping staff and improving processes," Catherine argued. "Projected numbers," Preston countered. "Speculation. I prefer to deal with certainties. 15 layoffs are a guarantee of immediate savings. And if we're right, if we can prove there's a better path, then we implement the improvements and do the layoffs. Maximum efficiency." Catherine left that meeting knowing they would need something extraordinary to change Preston's mind, and he had enough influence to drag other board members along with him. That night, Christopher found Catherine still in the office, clearly frustrated. "It didn't go well, did it?" he asked. "Preston is a wall," she replied. "No matter what arguments we use, he only sees the immediate numbers." "Then we have to give him immediate numbers," Christopher said. "How?" "By implementing a test version of the project tomorrow itself. We pick a small department, apply the improvements, and measure the results in real time during the meeting." Catherine looked at him with admiration. "That's risky. If it goes wrong, we'll be in the same situation we're already in. But if it works, we'll have concrete proof." "Which department?" "Customer service. It's small, has clear metrics, and we can implement changes quickly." Catherine smiled for the first time that day. "Let's do this." They spent the next 3 hours completely redesigning the workflow of the customer service department. Christopher proposed changes to task distribution, created a real-time monitoring system, and developed protocols that would eliminate redundancies. "We'll need full cooperation from the customer service team," Catherine said. "Leave that to me," Christopher replied. "They know their jobs are at risk too. They'll give it their all." By 2 in the morning, they finally finished the planning. The office was silent, lit only by the emergency lights and the glow of the computers. "Christopher," Catherine said softly, "can I ask you a personal question?" "Sure." "Why do you care so much? About your team, about this company, about me? Why didn't you just take one of the other job offers and move on?" Christopher thought carefully before answering. "Because I learned that running away from problems never solves anything. And because I realized I care about you more than I thought." Catherine felt her heart race. "Christopher, I know this isn't the right time," he continued, "but I wanted you to know. These last 2 days made me realize that what I feel for you goes far beyond professional admiration." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe we've found something worth more than any job." Catherine stood up and approached him. For a moment, it seemed like she was going to kiss him, but instead, she gently touched his face with her hand. "The day after tomorrow," she whispered. "First we save your team, then we figure out what all this means." Christopher covered her hand with his. "The day after tomorrow." The third day began at 5 in the morning. Christopher arrived at the office and found his team already working on implementing the changes in the customer service department. Their dedication moved him. Knowing their jobs depended on the success of that presentation, each one had come in early and was giving it their all. "How are we doing?" Christopher asked Emily. "The new system is already running," she replied. "The first indicators are promising. A 20% reduction in response time in the first 2 hours." "Excellent. And the reports?" "David is finishing up. We'll have live data to show during the meeting." Catherine arrived at 7, bringing coffee for the whole team. It was a simple gesture, but it showed how much the situation had changed the dynamic between them. "Ready for war?" Christopher asked. "Born ready," she replied, but he could see the tension in her eyes. The board meeting was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. Christopher and Catherine used the morning to make final adjustments to the presentation and to rehearse responses to possible objections. At 11 in the morning, they received news that changed everything. Catherine's secretary came to her with a worried expression. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, but an urgent notification came from the legal department. The lawyers for the main investors are demanding an emergency meeting about the layoffs. Catherine picked up the document and read it quickly. Her face went pale. "What happened?" Christopher asked. "The international investors found out the layoffs weren't carried out as planned. They're threatening legal action if the cost-cutting targets aren't met immediately." "What does that mean?" "It means we might not have until 2 in the afternoon. They want a resolution now." Christopher felt like the ground had vanished beneath his feet. After 3 days of intense work, of hope, of meticulous planning, everything could end because of an external pressure they didn't even know existed. "Is there any way to postpone this meeting?" he asked. "I can try," Catherine said, "but these are major investors. If they pull their money from the company, there won't be jobs for anyone." That was when Christopher made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. "Then let's go on the offensive," he said. "What do you mean?" "Instead of trying to postpone their meeting, let's ask to move it up. Let's present our project directly to the investors." Catherine looked at him as if he'd lost his mind. "Christopher, they won't want to hear alternative proposals. They want immediate results." "Then let's give them immediate results," Christopher said, pointing at the monitors showing the numbers from the customer service department. "Our test implementation is working. The numbers are improving in real time. Let's show them that innovation is more profitable than layoffs." Catherine was silent for a moment, processing the audacity of the proposal. That would be an all-or-nothing move. "And would you rather play or give up?" She smiled, and Christopher saw in that smile the brave woman who had fallen in love with the company before she fell in love with him. "Let's play," she said. The meeting was set for 11:30. Christopher and Catherine had exactly 20 minutes to adapt the entire presentation for an audience far more demanding than the company's board of directors. "Remember," Catherine said as they organized the last slides, "they only care about one thing: return on investment. Everything we say needs to translate into profit." "Got it," Christopher replied. "Do you know these investors?" "2 of them. Richard Hoffman is German, methodical, likes precise data. Sarah Chen is American, more aggressive, wants quick results. And the third, Dr. Alessandro Ricci, Italian. He's the most unpredictable, but also the most influential. If we can impress him, the other 2 might follow." When they walked into the meeting room, Christopher felt the tension in the air. The 3 investors were clearly annoyed by the delay in the layoffs. Preston Harrington was also there, likely expecting support for his conservative position. "Gentlemen," Catherine began, "I know you're here because the cost reduction targets weren't met as expected, but I'd like to propose something that could be even more profitable." Dr. Ricci interrupted her immediately. "Ms. Sterling, we didn't come here to hear excuses. We came to demand results." "And that's exactly what I'm going to present," Christopher said, standing up. "Concrete, measurable results happening right now." He turned on the projector and showed the real-time data from the customer service department. "In the last 6 hours, we implemented a new operational system on a trial basis. These are the results." The screen showed impressive graphs: a 22% reduction in service time, a 15% increase in customer satisfaction, and a 30% decrease in rework. Sarah Chen leaned forward. "These numbers are from today." "From this morning," Christopher confirmed. And this is just the beginning. Over the next 15 minutes, Christopher and Catherine presented a complete operational restructuring plan that could be implemented across all of the company's branches. The numbers were impressive: a projected 30% productivity increase in the first year, a 20% reduction in operating costs, and an improvement in customer satisfaction that could result in a 15% revenue growth. "That looks great on paper," Richard Hoffman said in his English with a German accent. "But how long would it take to implement across the entire company?" 6 months for full implementation, Christopher replied. "But we'd start seeing results in the first few weeks." "And if it doesn't work?" Dr. Ritchie asked. "If it doesn't work," Catherine said, "you can still go ahead with the layoffs. But if it does work, you'll have a much more valuable company." Preston Harrington, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke up. "That's speculation. Layoffs are guaranteed results. 15 layoffs would save $2 million a year," Christopher said calmly. "Our plan could generate an additional $20 million in revenue over the same period. Which is the better investment?" Dr. Ritchie leaned back in his chair, clearly intrigued. "Are you saying you can multiply the return on layoffs by 10? I'm saying we can turn a cost cut into a growth strategy." The three investors exchanged glances. Sarah Chen was the first to speak. "What guarantees do we have that this will work?" "The same guarantee you have that layoffs solve structural problems," Catherine replied. "The difference is that our approach builds value, instead of just reducing it." Richard Hoffman asked several technical questions about the implementation, all of which Christopher answered in detail. Dr. Ritchie questioned the financial numbers, which Catherine defended with solid data. Even Sarah Chen, initially skeptical, began to show genuine interest. After an hour of intense discussion, the investors asked for a moment alone to deliberate. Christopher and Catherine left the room with their hearts pounding. "Do you think we convinced them?" Christopher asked. "Dr. Ritchie is interested," Catherine replied. "Hoffman is cautious, but the numbers impressed him. Sarah is unpredictable, but she likes bold bets. And Preston. Preston will side with whoever's winning." 15 minutes later, they were called back in. Dr. Ritchie was the spokesperson for the decision. "We've decided to give you a chance," he said, "but with strict conditions." Christopher and Catherine braced themselves to hear the terms. First condition: immediate implementation in 3 branches as a pilot project. Second, measurable results within 30 days. Third, if the results don't reach at least half of the presented projections, the layoffs will be executed immediately and doubled. "Doubled?" Catherine asked. 30 layoffs instead of 15, Sarah Chen explained. "That's the price of failure." Christopher felt the weight of responsibility. If they failed, not only would his team be laid off, but another 15 people would also lose their jobs. "And if we meet the targets?" he asked. "If you meet them, Dr. Ritchie said with a smile. "We'll expand the project to the entire company, and you two will gain full autonomy to restructure the operation as you see fit." Catherine and Christopher exchanged glances. It was a high-stakes bet, but also the opportunity they had dreamed of. "We accept," Catherine said. "Excellent," Dr. Ritchie replied. "You have 30 days. The clock starts ticking now." As they left the meeting, Christopher and Catherine were exhausted and energized at the same time. They had bought time and a real opportunity, but the price of failure had doubled. "We did it," Catherine said, barely able to believe it. "The hardest part is still ahead," Christopher reminded her. "Now we have to actually make it work." "We will," she said with determination. "Together we will." That night they worked late into the evening planning the implementation in the 3 pilot branches. Christopher's team was beaming at the news of the temporary victory, but everyone understood that the real challenge was just beginning. Around 10 at night, when everyone else had gone home, Christopher and Catherine found themselves alone in the office once again. "Catherine," Christopher said, "we need to talk about us." "I know," she replied. "These last 3 days have changed everything." "What do you mean?" "Seeing you fight for your team, seeing how you handled all that pressure, it made me certain that what I feel for you is real." Christopher stepped closer to her. "And I realized that working with you is even better when we aren't hiding our feelings." "What do we do now?" "Now," Christopher said, gently touching her face. "We finish what we started." This time there was no hesitation. Catherine leaned in and finally they kissed. It was a kiss loaded with 3 years of unresolved tension, 3 days of intense emotion, and the promise of something entirely new beginning between them. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "Is this going to complicate things?" Catherine asked. "Probably," Christopher admitted, "but I'd rather have real complications than empty simplicities. And if we can't separate the professional from the personal, then we invent a new way to make both work." Catherine laughed, feeling lighter than she remembered feeling in years. "You have an answer for everything, don't you? Only for the questions that really matter." The 30 days that followed were the most intense and rewarding of both their lives. Christopher split his time between the 3 branches, implementing the new operating system and training the local teams. Catherine coordinated the strategic and financial aspects, while also keeping the international investors updated on progress. The professional partnership between them became even stronger after they stopped hiding their feelings. They complemented each other naturally. Christopher with his ability to motivate people and implement practical changes, Catherine with her strategic vision and political savvy. The personal relationship developed gradually and maturely. They set clear rules. In the office, they maintained absolute professionalism. After hours, they were free to be just Christopher and Catherine, 2 people discovering what it meant to love and be loved by someone who truly understood their dreams and ambitions. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing, the first results began to show in the 2nd week. The Chicago branch was the first to show significant improvements, a 20% increase in productivity and a 15% reduction in operational costs. The Atlanta branch took a bit longer to adapt, but it also started showing positive results. The Miami branch was where they faced the biggest challenge. The local manager, Bennett Baxter, resisted the changes from day one. He had worked at the company for 15 years the same way and saw no reason to change. "These people from headquarters come here wanting to teach us how to work," he complained to his team, "as if we don't know what we're doing." Christopher noticed the resistance during his 2nd visit to Miami. Instead of forcing the implementation, he decided to approach Bennett differently. "Bennett," he said in a private conversation, "I understand your concern. Changes are always difficult, especially when they come from outside. It's just that you folks at headquarters sometimes don't understand the reality of each region," Bennett replied. "Down here in the South, things work differently." "You're right," Christopher agreed, surprising Bennett. "And that's exactly why I need your help." "What do you mean?" "The system we're implementing needs to be adapted to the local reality. You know this team, you know the clients, you know the specific challenges here. Without your experience, we'll fail." Bennett was surprised by Christopher's humility. He was used to executives from headquarters showing up imposing changes without listening to anyone. "Do you really want my opinion?" he asked. "Not only do I want it, I need it," Christopher replied. "What changes would you make to the system so it works better here?" From that moment on, Bennett became the biggest advocate for the project in Miami. He proposed smart adaptations that made the implementation much more efficient. The branch not only met its goals but exceeded them. Christopher learned a valuable lesson from that episode. Leadership isn't about imposing ideas, but about finding ways to let the best ideas flourish through collaboration. Meanwhile, in New York City, Catherine was dealing with constant pressure from the investors. Dr. Ricci called weekly wanting detailed updates. Sarah Chen sent daily emails demanding progress reports. Richard Hoffman had assigned an auditor to track the project's expenses. "They're breathing down my neck," Catherine commented to Christopher during one of their weekly dinners. "That's understandable," he replied. "They're betting a lot of money on a radical change, but the numbers are on our side. For now, if something goes wrong in the 3rd or 4th week, it won't," Christopher said with conviction. "The teams are motivated, the processes are working, and we're learning something new every day." "How can you be so optimistic?" "Because I've learned that pessimism never built anything. and because I trust you." Catherine smiled. Having Christopher by her side had changed not only the way she worked, but the way she saw life. She had always been controlling and anxious, trying to predict and prevent every possible problem. He taught her that sometimes you have to trust the process and the people. In the third week, they received an unexpected surprise. Dr. Ricci showed up at the office unannounced, accompanied by two other investors Christopher and Catherine didn't know. "I hope you don't mind the surprise visit," Dr. Ricci said, "but my partners here wanted to see in person how this experimental project is going." "Of course," Catherine replied, trying to hide her tension. "Would you like to see the latest reports?" "We'd prefer to see the practical results," said one of the new investors, a tall man who introduced himself as François Dubois. "Can we visit one of the pilot branches?" Christopher and Catherine exchanged glances. A surprise visit could reveal issues still being ironed out, but refusing would be interpreted as a lack of confidence in the project. "Of course," Christopher said. "Which branch would you like to visit?" "The closest one," François replied. "We want to see the normal operation without any special preparation." The closest branch was Chicago, fortunately the one performing best. During the 2-hour trip there, Christopher and Catherine explained the system's details to the investors. "The key to success lies in the autonomy of the local teams," Christopher explained. "Instead of imposing rigid procedures, we created flexible guidelines that can be adapted to each reality." "And the financial results?" asked the third investor, who had introduced himself as James Morrison. "Average reduction of 18% in operational costs," Catherine answered, 22% increase in productivity, and a 25% improvement in customer satisfaction scores. "In all 3 branches?" François questioned. "To varying degrees," Christopher admitted. "Chicago is hitting those numbers. Atlanta is at 15, 18, and 20% respectively. Miami started slower, but it's picking up." When they arrived at the Chicago branch, the international investors were impressed by the work environment. The team was engaged, the processes flowed naturally, and the numbers on the screens showed performance above expectations. Dr. Ricci spoke directly with some employees, asking how they felt about the changes. The responses were consistently positive. "It was tough at first," said Michelle, an analyst who had been working there for 5 years. "But now the work makes more sense. You see how everything we do impacts the final result." "And do you feel more pressure?" James asked. "Actually less," replied Mike, the local supervisor. "The previous system had a lot of unnecessary bureaucracy. Now we focus on what really matters." During lunch with the branch's management team, the investors asked detailed technical questions about the implementation. The local manager, Karen Dalton, responded with enthusiasm and deep knowledge of the system. "What impresses me most," she said, "is how Christopher managed to adapt the system to our specific reality. He didn't come here to impose anything. He listened, learned, and then helped us improve." François turned to Christopher. "How did you develop this approach?" "I learned that each team has its own strengths and challenges," Christopher replied. "The role of management isn't to standardize everything, but to find ways to bring out the best in each group." "And if a branch can't adapt?" James asked. "Then we work together until we find a way that works," Catherine answered. "The goal isn't to punish those who struggle, but to help everyone succeed." At the end of the visit, Dr. Ricci asked for a private conversation with Christopher and Catherine. "I'm impressed," he admitted, "but also concerned." "Why?" Catherine asked. "Because this seems too good to be true. In my experience, when something seems perfect, there's usually a dark side hidden." Christopher understood the concern. "Dr. Ricci, I can assure you we're not painting a rosy picture. We had problems in Miami, initial resistance in Atlanta, and we're still adjusting some processes across all branches." "But are you being transparent about these issues?" François questioned. "Completely," Catherine confirmed. "Our weekly reports include both successes and failures. We want you to make decisions based on reality, not on hype." James, who had been quiet during the conversation, finally spoke. "What will you do if you can't maintain these results?" "We'll analyze what went wrong, make adjustments, and try again," Christopher replied. "But giving up is not an option." And if the international investors decide it's too risky to continue? Dr. Ricci asked. Catherine took a deep breath before answering. Then we'll respect your decision, but we'll fight until the very last moment to prove that this path is worth it. The three investors exchanged glances, clearly impressed by the sincerity and determination of Christopher and Catherine. Very well, Dr. Ricci said finally. You have 1 more week. If the results hold up, we'll expand the project to the entire company. If there's any significant decline, we'll implement the layoffs immediately. During the ride back to New York City, Christopher and Catherine discussed the next steps. They're almost convinced, Catherine said, but they're going to watch us very closely in the final week. That's natural, Christopher agreed. If I were an investor, I'd do the same thing. Aren't you worried? I'm confident. The systems are working, the teams are motivated, and we've learned to work together in a way I never thought possible. Catherine held his hand. Christopher, no matter what happens with the project, I want you to know that these 30 days have been the best of my life. The best so far, he corrected, because we still have many years ahead. The fourth and final week was one of constant tension. Everyone in the company knew the future would be decided in the next 7 days. Christopher visited the 3 branches again, making final adjustments and ensuring all systems were running perfectly. In Miami, Bennett had become a true ambassador of the project. He had personally trained his entire team and implemented improvements that even surprised Christopher. You know what? Bennett said during an evaluation meeting. At first I resisted because I thought you guys were just trying to change for the sake of change. But then I understood you were trying to make our work more meaningful. How so? Christopher asked. Before we followed processes because we had to. Now we understand why each process exists and how it contributes to the final result. It makes all the difference in day-to-day work. In Atlanta, the manager Tiffany had managed to motivate a team that had been demotivated for years. The branch's numbers had consistently improved, and the work environment was more positive. The secret was showing each person how their work impacts their colleagues, Tiffany explained. When they understood they weren't working alone, but as part of a team, everything changed. In Chicago, Karen was still exceeding expectations. Her branch had become the model for the others, and she was helping train managers from other regions. The most important thing I learned, she told Christopher, is that leadership isn't about controlling people. It's about creating conditions for them to do their best work possible. On the Friday of the last week, Dr. Ricci, Francois, and James returned for the final evaluation. This time, they brought a team of independent auditors to verify all the numbers. The final presentation lasted 3 hours. Christopher and Catherine showed not only the financial results, but also the impacts on the teams, customer satisfaction, and the company's organizational culture. The numbers were impressive: an average 20% reduction in operational costs, a 25% increase in productivity, a 30% improvement in customer satisfaction, and a 40% reduction in employee turnover. Are these results sustainable? Francois asked. Not just sustainable, Catherine replied, but scalable. Any branch that implements the system can expect similar results. And how long would it take to implement across the entire company? James questioned. 6 months for full implementation, Christopher said, but we'd start seeing results in the first branches within 4 weeks. Dr. Ricci asked the question everyone was waiting for. And if you're wrong? What if the results don't replicate in other branches? Then we'll take full responsibility, Catherine said, but we're convinced this model works because it was built based on the reality of the people who make the work happen. The auditors confirmed that all the numbers presented were accurate and verifiable. There was no data manipulation or misleading interpretations. After 2 hours of private deliberation, the investors returned with their decision. We have decided to approve the expansion of the project to the entire company, Dr. Ricci announced, but with some conditions. Christopher and Catherine braced themselves to hear the terms. First condition, gradual implementation with rigorous quarterly evaluations. Second, full autonomy for the 2 of you in running the project. Third, additional budget for hiring specialized consultants if needed. Catherine could hardly believe what she was hearing. You're approving a full expansion. Not just approving, Francois said. We're increasing the investment. We want this model to become the standard way the company operates. And there's one more thing, James added. We want to offer the two of you a partnership in the company. A minority stake, but a significant one. Christopher and Catherine looked at each other, stunned. In 30 days, they had gone from trying to save 15 jobs to becoming partners in a growing company. Why? Catherine asked. Because you've proven you have a long-term vision and the ability to execute it, Dr. Ricci explained. And because we believe true leaders should have a stake in the success they help create. That night, Christopher and Catherine celebrated not just their professional success, but also what they had built personally. They were on the terrace of Catherine's apartment, looking at the city lights. "We did it," she said, still hardly believing it. "We didn't just save the jobs," Christopher replied. "We created something much bigger. What comes next?" "Now," Christopher said, turning to her, "we have to decide how we'll integrate our personal lives with our new professional reality. Do you have any ideas?" "Actually, I have a proposal," he said, pulling a small box out of his pocket. Catherine looked at the box with total surprise. "Christopher, I know it's early, I know it's complicated, I know we'll have to invent a completely new way to make this work," he said, opening the box to reveal a simple but elegant ring. "But I also know I want to figure out with you how to build a life that's both professionally fulfilling and personally happy." Catherine felt tears in her eyes. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure that I love you. I'm sure that we're better together than apart. And I'm sure that if we can transform a company in 30 days, we can invent a marriage that works for two workaholics." She laughed through her tears. "That was the most unromantic and most romantic proposal I've ever heard." "So what's the answer?" "The answer," Catherine said, extending her hand for him to put the ring on, "is that I'd love to figure out with you how to make this work." 6 months later, the company had become a market benchmark. The operational model developed by Christopher and Catherine was being studied by other organizations, and they had been invited to speak at international conferences. The wedding took place in a simple ceremony, with only family and close friends. Christopher's original team, all 15 employees who had nearly been let go, served as special groomsmen and bridesmaids. "Who would have thought," Emily commented during the party, "that a resignation letter would lead to a wedding?" "And a transformed company," David added. During the reception speech, Christopher talked about how sometimes the biggest opportunities come disguised as seemingly insurmountable problems. "A year ago, I thought I knew everything about leadership and management," he said. "I discovered I knew nothing about real teamwork until I met a CEO willing to get soaked in the rain to save important relationships." Catherine, in her speech, talked about how learning to trust others had transformed not just the way she worked, but the way she lived. "For 20 years, I believed success meant doing everything alone," she said. "Christopher taught me that true success is being able to make other people successful too." A year after the wedding, they received an unexpected offer. An international network of companies wanted to hire them as consultants to implement the operational model they had developed. "It would be an opportunity to impact many more organizations," Catherine commented as they reviewed the proposal. "And helping many more people find meaning in their work," Christopher added. "Do you think we should accept?" "I think we should do what we've always done. Analyze carefully, talk to everyone affected, and decide based on what's best for everyone." They ended up accepting the proposal, but with one condition. They would maintain an active stake in the original company, which had become their organizational innovation lab. 2 years later, they were operating in 15 countries, helping hundreds of companies implement more humane and efficient management models. But they always returned to New York City, to the company where it all began, to the team that was almost let go and became the core of an organizational revolution. In an interview for a business magazine, a journalist asked what the secret to their success had been. "The secret," Catherine replied, "was learning that leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about asking the right questions and listening to the answers with an open mind. And about understanding," Christopher added, "that professional success without personal fulfillment is an empty victory. When you find ways to integrate who you are with what you do, everything becomes more powerful." The journalist then asked a personal question. How do you manage to work together as a married couple? Isn't it hard to separate personal and professional life? Christopher and Catherine looked at each other and smiled. We don't try to separate them, Catherine said. We try to integrate them in a healthy way. We have clear rules about when to talk about work at home, Christopher explained, and we also have personal projects completely separate from work. Catherine is writing a book about female leadership, and I'm taking a cooking class. Cooking? The journalist asked, surprised. I found that cooking teaches me a lot about management, Christopher said with a laugh. Timing, coordination, adapting when something goes wrong, and Catherine loves being a guinea pig for my culinary experiments. As long as he doesn't try to apply corporate methodology in the kitchen, Catherine added, making everyone laugh. 5 years after the rainy night, when Catherine knocked on Christopher's door, they were sitting on the same terrace where he had proposed to her. Now there were 2 extra chairs on the terrace for the twins who had been born 8 months earlier. Have you ever wondered what our life would be like if I hadn't come to your house that night? Catherine asked, rocking Ethan while Christopher fed Chloe. I'd probably be working at some traditional company. You'd be running the company alone, and 15 excellent people would be unemployed, he replied. Do you regret anything? Christopher thought for a moment. I regret not having had the courage to talk about my feelings sooner. We lost a few months of happiness because of the fear of complicating things. And I regret almost letting pride and fear speak louder than the truth, Catherine said. If I hadn't come to your house that night. But you did, and that made all the difference. You know what I learned? Catherine said, looking at the children. That the best moments in life happen when we stop trying to control everything and start trusting the process. And that sometimes, Christopher added, the riskiest decisions are the ones that lead us exactly where we needed to be. Chloe started crying, and Ethan woke up right after. Christopher and Catherine looked at each other and laughed. Welcome to our greatest management challenge, Catherine said. One that no MBA course prepared us for, Christopher finished. While taking care of the babies, they talked about their plans for the coming years. The company was still growing, the consulting work was expanding to new continents, and they were developing a leadership training program based on everything they had learned. And if one day our children ask us what the most important moment of our lives was, Catherine asked, I'll tell them about a rainy night when the bravest woman I ever met had the courage to be vulnerable, Christopher replied. And I'll tell them about a man who taught me that true strength isn't about never needing help, but knowing when to ask for and offer support. 10 years later, Christopher and Catherine were speaking at an international leadership conference. The theme of the talk was, When Crises Turn into Opportunities. Our model started with a crisis, Catherine explained to the audience of 1,000 executives. 15 people were about to lose their jobs, a professional relationship was destroyed, and 2 people were hiding from feelings that could have changed everything much sooner. But the crisis forced us to question everything we thought we knew about leadership, about work, about relationships, Christopher continued. And in the process of saving 15 jobs, we discovered a model that has already impacted over 300,000 people in 40 countries. A participant raised their hand. What is the main lesson you would give to leaders facing similar crises? That the courage to be vulnerable is more powerful than the strength of pretending to be in control, Catherine replied, and that the best solutions usually come when we stop trying to solve everything on our own and start involving the people who are truly affected by the problems, Christopher added. One last question, said a woman in the audience. For couples who work together, what's the secret? Christopher and Catherine smiled. Understanding that working together doesn't mean giving up your individuality, Catherine said. It means finding ways to be even more of who you are when you're united. And remembering that, at the end of the day, people are more important than projects, Christopher finished. If you can keep your focus on people, whether it's your employees, your partners, or your family, the professional results come naturally. That night at the hotel, they received a video call from the children, who were now 10 years old and at home with their grandparents. Mom, Dad, when are you going to stop traveling so much? Chloe asked. Soon, sweetheart, Catherine replied. Just a few more companies to help, and then we'll take a long vacation. Can we go to the beach? Ethan asked. Of course, Christopher said, and I'll cook every day. No work, no meetings, just family. Promise? The two asked together. We promise, Christopher and Catherine answered in unison. After they hung up the call, they sat in silence for a moment. Do you think we're traveling too much? Catherine asked. I think we're in the final phase of building something that will give us the freedom to choose our projects, Christopher replied. 2 more years, and we'll be able to work only with the companies we really want to help, and spend more time with the children, and with each other. Do you regret anything, Christopher? Taking so long to realize that success isn't about arriving first, but about arriving together with the right people. And I regret believing for so long that strength was synonymous with loneliness, Catherine said. Discovering that I can be strong and vulnerable at the same time changed everything. You know what the most impressive thing about our whole story is? Christopher asked. What? That it all started with you wet in the rain, knocking on my door. If someone had told me back then that that moment would change the lives of thousands of people, I wouldn't have believed it, Catherine finished. I thought I was just trying to save 15 jobs, and it ended up saving much more than that. It saved 2 people who were getting lost in work and forgetting how to live. 15 years after the rainy night that changed everything, Christopher and Catherine decided to return to their roots. They were running the original company as CEO and COO, respectively, but now it was a completely different organization. The company had grown from 500 to 3,000 employees, operated in 12 countries, and was considered one of the best companies to work for in the world. But most importantly, it upheld the principles that Christopher and Catherine had discovered during those 30 crucial days. Emily, the senior analyst who had almost been fired 15 years earlier, was now the director of human development. David had become a specialist in digital transformation. Bennett, the manager from Miami, who initially resisted the changes, ran the entire southern operation. You know what the most incredible part of this whole story is? Emily said during the 15th anniversary celebration meeting of the project. It's that you never forgot it all started with 15 people who almost lost their jobs. How could we forget? Christopher replied. You are the living proof that motivated and respected people can exceed any expectation. And you are the constant reminder of why we do what we do, Catherine added. That night, Christopher and Catherine were once again on the terrace, now watching Ethan and Chloe, who at 15 were more interested in their own projects than in listening to their parents' stories about the past. They have no idea how different our lives could have been, Catherine remarked. It's better that way, Christopher said. They are growing up in a world where they believe work can be meaningful, leadership can be humane, and success can include happiness. Do you think they'll follow in our footsteps? I hope they follow their own paths, but if they learn that it's worth fighting for what they believe in, and that the best victories are those shared with others, that will be enough. Catherine moved closer to Christopher, just as she had done 15 years ago on the same terrace. Christopher, can I ask you a question? Always. If you could go back in time and change something, would you? Christopher thought carefully before answering. I would change the moment I found out you were going to fire my team. Instead of feeling betrayed, I wish I had immediately asked how I could help. And I, Catherine said, would change every time I made important decisions alone without asking the opinion of the people who would be affected, especially yours. But in the end, Christopher said, maybe we needed to go through all of that to learn the lessons we learned. Maybe that's just how life is. You only understand the value of things after you almost lose them, or after you have the courage to go after them on a rainy night. They stood embraced, watching the city that had been the backdrop for so many transformations. 15 years later, they still marveled at the life they had built together. You know what my favorite part of our whole story is? Catherine asked. What? That it's not over yet. We still have so many things to discover, to build, to live together, and so many people to help find their own paths. Do you think we'll manage to do that until we're old? Catherine, Christopher said, kissing her forehead. If we manage to transform an entire company and still find time to raise 2 incredible kids, I'm sure we can grow old together while continuing to make a difference. Even when we're wearing dentures and walking with a cane? especially when we're wearing dentures and walking with a cane. Just imagine, the oldest, wisest consultants in the corporate world. Catherine laughed, picturing the scene. Are we going to be those annoying old folks who keep telling stories about the good old days? We're going to be those old folks who inspire other people to believe it's never too late to turn crises into opportunities. And who show that true love isn't just about finding the right person, but about building the right life together. 20 years after the night that changed everything, Christopher and Catherine were preparing for one last big transformation. After 2 decades leading one of the most innovative companies in the world, they had decided to retire from executive management to dedicate themselves fully to training new leaders. The company would be transferred to a cooperative model, where all employees would become partners. Emily would be the new CEO, David would take over as technology director, and Bennett would coordinate international operations. It's strange leaving everything in other people's hands, Catherine remarked, as they packed their office belongings. It's not leaving it in other people's hands, Christopher corrected. It's seeing the fruit of 20 years of work finally ripen. Are you afraid they'll change everything we built? I have hope they'll improve everything we built. That would be the greatest recognition of our work. On their last day as company executives, they organized a general meeting with all employees. The main auditorium was packed, with people also participating via video conference from all branches around the world. When we started this journey, Catherine said into the microphone, our goal was to save 15 jobs. Today, we are leaving an organization that employs 12,000 people in 23 countries. But the number of jobs isn't what makes us most proud, Christopher continued. What makes us proud is knowing we created a model where people can find meaning in their work, where leadership is synonymous with service, and where success is measured not just by profits, but by positive impact on people's lives. You, Catherine said, looking at the audience, are living proof that when we trust people and create conditions for them to thrive, there's no limit to what can be achieved. At the end of the meeting, there was a surprise. Emily stood up and announced that the Employee Council had decided to name the main auditorium the Christopher and Catherine Vance Auditorium, in honor of the couple who had transformed not just the company, but the lives of thousands of people. It wasn't just because of the financial results, Emily explained. It was because they proved it's possible to be successful without sacrificing humanity. That night, Christopher and Catherine took their final walk through the company's corridors as executives. They stopped on every floor, remembering important moments, challenging projects and people who had made an impact on their lives. You know where I'd like to end our visit? Catherine asked. Where? In the room where you were working 20 years ago, when you handed in your resignation letter. The room still existed, now converted into a library for employees. There was a plaque on the door. The transformation room, where crises became opportunities. They put up a plaque, Christopher observed, smiling. And look at that, Catherine said, pointing to a display case in the corner of the room. They kept your original resignation letter. The letter was framed, accompanied by an explanation of how that document had been the catalyst for the greatest organizational transformation in the company's history. It's surreal, Christopher said. When I wrote that, I was angry, disappointed, hopeless, and now it's a symbol of how crisis moments can be the start of something extraordinary. They sat down in the library armchairs, looking at the letter that had changed everything. Christopher, can I tell you something? Always. That night, when I knocked on your door, I didn't just go to explain about the layoffs. No. I went because I realized I was losing the most important person in my professional life. And because I was afraid that if I let you go, I'd lose forever the chance to find out if you felt something for me too. Christopher held her hand. And I confessed something I've never told anyone. That morning, before writing the resignation letter, I thought about talking to you about my feelings, but I thought it would be inappropriate. Imagine if you had said something. Maybe our story would have been different. Maybe we'd have avoided the whole crisis. Or maybe, Catherine said wisely, we needed to go through the crisis to truly understand what we felt for each other and what we could build together. Do you think everything happened the way it was supposed to? I think it happened in a way that let us grow the most, individually and as a couple. And now, What's next? Now, Catherine said, standing up and reaching out her hand to him. We start our next adventure. What adventure? Finding out what it's like to be just Christopher and Catherine, without executive titles, without corporate responsibilities, just the two of us, our kids, and all the time in the world to do what we truly love. And what do we truly love? Helping people discover their potential, teaching leaders to lead with humanity, and living each day as if it were the first day of a new story. 5 years after retiring from executive life, Christopher and Catherine had become the most respected leadership mentors in the world. They no longer worked out of financial necessity. Selling their shares in the company had secured them for several lifetimes. They worked for a purpose. They had created a foundation that offered free leadership programs for young people from underserved communities. Ethan and Chloe, now 20 years old, were actively involved in the foundation, each developing their own approaches to leadership mentoring. "It's amazing," Ethan commented during a family dinner. "You guys started out trying to save 15 jobs and ended up creating a global movement." "The movement already existed," Christopher corrected. "We just gave a voice to something many people already felt, that work can be a source of fulfillment, not just survival. And that true leadership is about lifting others up, not lifting yourself up," Chloe added. "You learned the lessons well," Catherine said proudly. "We learned by watching you two," Ethan replied. "From a young age we saw how you treat each other with respect, how you make decisions together, how you handle conflicts. It was our first school of leadership." "And our first school of relationships," Chloe finished. "Because of you, I know it's possible to find someone who's a true partner, not just a boyfriend." Christopher and Catherine looked at each other, moved. 25 years after that rainy night, they were still learning from each other, still surprising each other, still growing together. "You know what the most beautiful thing about all this is?" Catherine asked later, when they were alone. "What?" "That our story inspired so many other stories. How many couples met at the company? How many leaders changed the way they work after taking part in our programs? And how many people discovered they can be vulnerable and strong at the same time? Remember that email we got from Emily last month? The one about her daughter. She said her 15-year-old daughter wants to study business to change the corporate world the way Uncle Christopher and Aunt Catherine did. It's that kind of impact that moves me. A whole generation growing up believing that leadership can be human, and that crises can be opportunities in disguise. That night they received an unexpected phone call. It was Dr. Alessandro Ricci, now 80 years old, calling from Italy. "Christopher, Catherine, I'm calling to share some news," he said, his voice still steady. "I've decided to donate my entire fortune to causes related to leadership education." "That's wonderful, Dr. Ricci," Catherine replied, "and I want you two to manage this donation. It's 200 million euros to be invested in leadership training programs around the world." Christopher nearly dropped the phone. "Dr. Ricci, that's an enormous responsibility. That's why I'm trusting you with it. In 25 years of watching the corporate world, I've never seen two people who had as much positive impact as you have." "But Dr. Ricci," Catherine said, "we're already retired from executive life. And that's exactly why you're the right people. You won't use this money to benefit yourselves. You'll use it to benefit others." After they hung up, Christopher and Catherine sat in silence for several minutes. 200 million euros, Christopher finally said, to train leaders around the world. "Do you realize what this means?" "It means," Catherine said slowly, "that our story is far from over. It means we can impact millions of lives. And it means Dr. Ricci believes we're capable of doing this. Are we?" Catherine smiled. "Remember that night 25 years ago when I showed up soaked at your door? Did you think we could save 15 jobs in 3 days? At the time, I thought it was impossible. And we didn't just save those jobs, we transformed an entire company. So you think we can manage 200 million euros? I think we can figure out a way to do it that honors Dr. Ricci's trust and maximizes the impact on people's lives. Together, always together." 3 years later, the Ricci Vance Foundation had become the world's largest organization for training humanistic leaders, With programs in 50 countries, it had already trained over 100,000 leaders who were transforming their organizations and communities. Christopher and Catherine, now 55, traveled the world tracking the program's impacts. It was exhausting work, but rewarding in ways they'd never experienced. "Remember when we worried about saving 15 jobs?" Catherine asked during a break at a conference in Bangalore, India. "Now we're helping shape leaders who will save millions of jobs," Christopher replied. "And the most beautiful part is seeing how every person who goes through our programs creates their own version of our story." "What do you mean?" "Yesterday, I talked to an executive from Brazil who said our program inspired her to have the courage to drive change at her company. Now she's implementing a model similar to ours in a textile industry." And I spoke with a young entrepreneur from Kenya who started a cooperative of small producers based on the principles we teach. "That's what I'm most proud of," Catherine said. "We're not creating copies of our story. We're inspiring people to write their own stories. And each of those stories touches other lives, which touch other lives. A ripple effect of positive leadership." That night at the hotel, they received a video call from the family. Ethan was finishing his master's in organizational psychology, and Chloe had started a startup focused on workplace well-being. "How are things over there?" Ethan asked. "Intense," Christopher replied, "but incredible. Today we met a woman who came from a slum in Mumbai and now runs a social enterprise that employs 2,000 people. And a former inmate who became a mentor for at-risk youth," Catherine added. "It's amazing how stories of transformation are universal," Chloe commented. "Here in New York City, I met a woman who used to be a cleaner, and now she's the director of human resources at a multinational." "What do all these stories have in common?" Ethan asked. "Someone believed in their potential and gave them a chance to grow," Christopher replied. "And they had the courage to take on challenges that seemed impossible," Catherine finished. "Like you two 28 years ago," Chloe said. "The difference," Christopher said, "is that now we know impossible is just a matter of perspective. And when you have the right partner by your side," Catherine added, "any challenge becomes an adventure." 10 years after taking over the Richie Vance Foundation, Christopher and Catherine decided to take a break to reflect on everything they had achieved. They returned to New York City, to the apartment where it all began, to the terrace where he had proposed to her. 35 years, Christopher said, watching the sunset over the city, since that rainy night. "Can you believe everything that's happened?" "Sometimes I still think it's a dream," Catherine admitted. "When I think it all started with 15 people nearly losing their jobs, and now we've directly impacted over 500,000 people. And indirectly, millions." They fell silent, processing the magnitude of what they had built. "Christopher, can I ask you a question I've always wanted to ask?" "Of course." "Have you ever wondered what our lives would have been like if I hadn't fallen in love with you?" Christopher thought carefully. "I think I would have eventually left the company and found another job. You would have kept on being a competent CEO, but we never would have discovered that together we were far more powerful than apart. And thousands of people wouldn't have had the opportunities they did. It's a daunting responsibility when you stop to think about it, but it's also the greatest honor there could be," Catherine said, "knowing that our love inspired transformations that changed lives around the world. Our love and our courage to be vulnerable, and our willingness to fight for what we believed in, even when it seemed impossible." Ethan and Chloe arrived for dinner with their respective significant others. The table was lively, with conversations about everyone's projects, future plans, and funny everyday stories. "Mom, Dad," Chloe said during dessert, "we have an announcement to make." Christopher and Catherine braced themselves, imagining it might be an engagement. "We've decided to start a youth leadership institute together," Ethan said. "We want to work specifically with teenagers aged 15 to 18, Chloe added. "The idea is to shape leaders before they enter the job market," Ethan explained, "so that when they get to companies, they already have the values and tools needed to create more humane environments," Chloe added. "And we want to do it using everything we learned from watching you two," Ethan said. Christopher and Catherine exchanged a look, moved. "Are you sure you want to work together?" Catherine asked. "You might get along great as siblings, but working as a team is different." Mom, Chloe said, smiling, we grew up watching you two work together and love each other more every day. If we learned anything from you, it's that working with someone you love and respect is a privilege, not a problem. As long as you keep communication open and are honest with each other, Christopher advised. And remember that disagreeing isn't fighting, Catherine added. Some of our best ideas were born from intense discussions. And always keep the focus on the people you're trying to help, Christopher said. When you start caring more about who's right than what the best solution is, it's time to stop and talk. 3 months later, Ethan and Chloe officially launched the Next Generation Leadership Institute. The launch event took place in the auditorium of the original company, now called the Christopher and Catherine Sterling Auditorium. It's symbolic, Emily, who attended the ceremony, commented. The story began here, with 15 people almost losing their jobs. Today your kids are launching an institute that will shape the next generation of leaders. And all of this in the room named after you two, David added. Christopher and Catherine were proud and emotional, seeing their children follow their own path, but inspired by the values they had demonstrated over the years, was a greater achievement than any professional success. During the opening speech, Ethan talked about how growing up in a family where leadership and love went hand in hand had shaped his worldview. I learned from my parents that leading isn't about being in charge, he said. It's about being of service, and that a leader's strength doesn't come from their ability to do everything alone, but from their ability to make others successful. Chloe, in her speech, emphasized the importance of vulnerability in leadership. My mum taught me that admitting you don't know everything isn't weakness, it's wisdom, she said, and my dad showed me that the best leader is the one who develops other leaders, not the one who centralizes power. At the end of the event, when most of the guests had already left, the family stayed alone in the auditorium. You know we're really proud of you, right? Catherine said, hugging her children. And that you can count on us for anything, Christopher added. We know, Dad, Ethan replied, and we also know we have a big responsibility to carry forward everything you've built. Not carry, Christopher corrected, transform. Each generation needs to find its own way to make a difference. You have our leadership DNA, Catherine said, but you have your own ideas, your own energy, your own vision for the future. And that's exactly how it should be, Christopher completed. 5 years later, the Next Generation Leadership Institute had already trained over 10,000 young leaders across Brazil. Ethan and Chloe had proven they were capable not only of honoring their parents' legacy, but of creating their own impact. Christopher and Catherine, now in their 60s, had decided to gradually wind down their activities at the foundation to focus more on their personal lives. They wanted to travel without professional commitments, spend time with friends, and explore hobbies they had set aside during decades of intense work. You know what the strangest thing about retirement is? Catherine asked on a Saturday morning while they had coffee on the terrace. What? The feeling that we still have so much to do, but also the certainty that we've already done enough. What do you mean? 40 years of intense work leaves you kind of addicted to productivity. Sometimes I feel guilty for spending an entire morning reading a book just for pleasure. Christopher laughed. I totally get it. Yesterday I spent 3 hours in the kitchen trying out a new recipe, and in the middle of it I thought, isn't this a waste of time? We need to relearn how to live in the present without always planning the next project. And learn that resting is also productive. Rest recharges creativity, energy, perspective. Do you think we managed to leave a legacy that will last without us? Christopher pointed to the newspaper on the table. On the first page of the business section, there was an article about a Japanese company that had implemented the Vance model of participatory management. I think our greatest victory is that the ideas have taken on a life of their own, he said. They no longer depend on us to keep spreading. And our children are creating their own paths. And hundreds of thousands of people around the world are applying what they learned from us to their own realities. It's a different kind of immortality, Catherine reflected. It's not about being remembered. It's about having planted seeds that keep on germinating. That afternoon, they received an unexpected visit. Emily showed up at the apartment with an unusual proposal. I want to make a documentary about your story, she announced. A documentary? Christopher asked, surprised. To record everything that happened from that rainy night to today, interview the people who were part of the journey, show the impact you've had. Emily, our story is interesting, but I'm not sure it's documentary material, Catherine said. You're kidding, right? Emily replied. You completely transformed the way the world thinks about leadership and people management. There are business schools that have entire courses based on what you did. But documentaries are for famous people, Christopher protested. You are famous. Maybe you don't show up in celebrity magazines, but you're known throughout the corporate world. And more importantly, your story can inspire other people to have the courage to make meaningful changes. Catherine and Christopher looked at each other, considering the proposal. What would the documentary focus on? Catherine asked. Personal and professional transformation. How two people who fell in love also managed to transform the world of work for millions of other people. And how seemingly destructive crises can become opportunities for growth, Christopher added. Exactly. The message is that anyone, at any time, can decide to do things differently. All right, Catherine finally said, but with one condition. What? Half the documentary has to be about the people who were part of the journey with us. We don't want to be the sole protagonists of a story that involved thousands of people. And we want part of the documentary's proceeds to go to leadership training programs in underserved communities, Christopher added. Emily smiled. Typical of you. Even when you're being honored, you think about how to benefit other people. The documentary production took 2 years. Emily interviewed over 100 people in 15 countries, executives who had transformed their companies, employees who had discovered meaning in their work, young leaders trained by the Foundation's programs. The most emotional part for Christopher and Catherine was watching footage from the company's early years, interviews with long-time employees, and testimonies from people they had forgotten existed, but who had been deeply impacted by some interaction or decision. It's amazing, Christopher commented during one of the editing sessions. There are people here saying a 5-minute conversation with me changed their careers, and I don't even remember those meetings. It's because you always treated everyone as if they were important, Emily explained. You never developed that arrogance that many executives have. You stayed human. The documentary, Love and Leadership, the story of Christopher and Catherine Vance, premiered simultaneously on streaming and in some theaters. The reaction was surprising. Within a week, it became one of the most watched documentaries on the platform. Critics praised not only the story itself, but the way it was told, focusing on the ordinary people who were transformed, not just the leaders who drove the changes. A documentary about leadership that doesn't glorify leaders, wrote one critic. It's about how true leadership is an act of love and service. What surprised Christopher and Catherine the most were the messages they started receiving. Thousands of people wrote, sharing how the documentary had inspired them to make changes in their own lives and work. You've created a movement without meaning to, Emily commented during a family dinner. What do you mean? Catherine asked. People are organizing study groups based on the documentary. They're implementing changes in their companies. They're finding the courage to question authoritarian leadership. And there are even cases of couples who met through discussion groups about the documentary, Ethan added. Really? Christopher asked, amused. Completely serious. Your story inspired people to believe it's possible to find love and professional purpose in the same life. Catherine shook her head in disbelief. 45 years after that rainy night, our story is still creating new stories. And it will keep doing so, Christopher said, because what we documented wasn't just our personal experience. It was proof that a more humane way of working and leading is possible. 2 years after the documentary's release, Christopher and Catherine received an invitation that deeply moved them. The United Nations wanted to appoint them Goodwill Ambassadors for Ethical Leadership. It's an incredible honor, said the UN representative during the meeting, but also a recognition of 40 years of consistent work in building a more humane corporate world. We don't know if we're the right people to represent the UN, Catherine said humbly. You're exactly the right people, he replied, because you never sought personal recognition, you always worked to uplift others. And what would our role as ambassadors be? Christopher asked. To help develop global guidelines for ethical leadership, to work with governments and international organizations to promote more humane work environments, and to inspire a new generation of leaders around the world. The inauguration ceremony took place at the UN headquarters in New York City. Christopher and Catherine were nervous. It was a level of responsibility they had never imagined having. "Are we ready for this?" Catherine whispered to Christopher as they waited to be called to the stage. "Probably not," he replied. "But if there's one thing we've learned, it's that perfect preparation is the enemy of necessary action. And that when purpose is greater than fear, we find strengths we didn't even know we had." During the acceptance speech, Christopher spoke about how their journey had started with a seemingly small crisis, 15 people almost losing their jobs. "We learned that there's no such thing as a small problem when it comes to impacting people's lives," he said. "And that truly transformative solutions only emerge when we put humanity at the center of our decisions." In her speech, Catherine emphasized that ethical leadership isn't an abstract concept, but a daily practice. Every conversation we have, every decision we make, every way we treat the people around us is an opportunity to show what kind of world we want to build, she said. The international reaction was extraordinary. Their speech was translated into 50 languages and shared millions of times on social media. Universities began including the Vance model in their business curricula. Companies created leadership programs based on their philosophies. Governments expressed interest in adapting their practices for public work environments. "It's frightening," Catherine remarked to Christopher one night in New York City after a full day of meetings at the UN. "We have so much responsibility now." "It's both terrifying and inspiring," Christopher agreed. 45 years ago, you knocked on my door worried about 15 people. Today, we're here representing principles that could impact millions. Do you think we're up to that responsibility? I think we're exactly where we need to be, with the experience necessary to understand the problems and with enough humility to keep learning. 5 years as UN Goodwill Ambassadors solidified Christopher and Catherine as global references in ethical leadership. They had worked with governments in 20 countries, helped develop public policies for healthier workplaces, and inspired changes in organizations worldwide. At 65, they decided it was time for a final transition. Not a complete retirement, but a significant reduction in activities to devote more time to family, hobbies, and personal projects. 50 years of work, Catherine said during a walk in the park near home, and the feeling that we've only just begun to understand what truly matters. Christopher replied, "What truly matters? Real relationships, positive impact on people's lives, and the courage to be who we are without masks." "Do you regret anything?" Christopher thought for a long moment. "I regret that it took us so long to understand that vulnerability is strength, not weakness. And I regret believing for so many years that I needed to be perfect to be respected," Catherine added. "Finding out that people respect me more when I admit my mistakes was liberating. But maybe we needed this entire journey to reach these understandings. Maybe life really is about learning by doing, by making mistakes, by starting over." That evening, they organized a dinner with the extended family. Ethan and Chloe were there with their respective spouses and children. Christopher and Catherine were now grandparents to 4 children between 2 and 8 years old. "Grandpa Christopher, Grandma Catherine," Lily, the oldest grandchild, asked, "Are you famous?" Christopher and Catherine laughed. "Why do you ask that, sweetie?" Catherine replied. "Because the teacher at school said you were on TV and that you're important." "We're important to you," Christopher said, hugging his granddaughter, "to your mum and dad, to our friends. And we were lucky enough to be able to help other people too." "But we're not more important than anyone else," Catherine added. "We just had different opportunities." "And what did you do with those opportunities?" asked Owen, who was 6. "We tried to use them to give other people good opportunities too," Christopher explained. "Like what?" Mike stepped in. "Remember when we talked about how important it is to be kind to friends at school?" The children nodded. "Grandpa and Grandma spent their whole lives teaching adults to be kind to each other at work," Chloe explained. "And showing that when people are happy at work, everyone does better," Catherine added. "That's cool," said Grace, who was 5. "When I grow up, I want to make people happy at work too." "And you can," Christopher said, hugging his granddaughter. Each of you can choose to be the kind of person who makes others feel good. Later, when the children were asleep, the family kept talking. It's amazing seeing you as grandparents, Chloe remarked. You have the same patience and wisdom you had as leaders, but in a lighter way. Experience teaches that not everything has to be intense, Catherine replied. Sometimes the deepest impact comes from simple, genuine moments. Like this conversation right now, Mike said. In 20 years, our children won't remember their titles or achievements, but how you made them feel important and loved. And that's how it should be, Christopher said. In the end, what remains are the relationships and the love we share. On their 50th wedding anniversary, Christopher and Catherine organized a simple garden party at their home. Only close family and friends were present, about 50 people who truly mattered in their lives. During the speech, Christopher recalled the night that changed everything. 50 years ago, a brave woman knocked on my door on a rainy night, he said, looking at Catherine. She was wet, nervous, and about to change not just my life, but the lives of thousands of people around the world. That night, Catherine continued, I thought I was just trying to save a few jobs and explain a tough decision. I had no idea I was starting the greatest adventure of my life. 50 years later, Christopher said, I can say with certainty that choosing to love this woman was the best decision I ever made. And working alongside this man taught me that true love isn't about finding someone perfect, but about growing together with someone special, Catherine added. Emily, who was at the party, asked to speak. Christopher, Catherine, you didn't just transform a company or create a management model. You taught us that it's possible to live with purpose, love deeply, and impact the world by simply being who we are. David, now a retired director, added, and you showed us that the best leaders are those who make leadership unnecessary, because they develop people to the point where they become leaders themselves. Bennett, who had traveled especially from Miami for the party, said, you taught me that resisting change is natural, but accepting positive change is liberating. As the night went on, several people shared stories of how Christopher and Catherine had impacted their lives. Former employees, co-workers, and people who had taken part in the training programs. You know what the most beautiful thing about all this is? Asked Dr. Ricci, now 90 years old, who had made a point to be present via video call from Italy. What? Christopher and Catherine asked together. It's that you created a legacy that goes far beyond anything any of us could have imagined. Not just more humane companies, but closer-knit families, more authentic relationships, and people more courageous to follow their dreams. That night, after everyone had gone home, Christopher and Catherine stayed alone in the garden, watching the stars. 50 years, Catherine murmured, and it feels like yesterday you showed up wet at my door. Do you remember exactly what I said that night? How could I forget? Christopher smiled. You said, I accept you're leaving the company, but I won't accept losing you as a person. And do you remember what you thought when I said that? I thought it was impossible for someone so strong and independent to be so vulnerable. And now I understand that vulnerability was the greatest display of strength I had ever witnessed. Catherine moved closer to him, as she had done so many times in that same garden over the years. Christopher, if you could go back in time and change one thing about our story, would you? I would change only one thing, he answered without hesitation. What? I would have had the courage to say I was in love with you long before that night. And I, Catherine said, would have stopped trying to be perfect and started being authentic much sooner. But perhaps, Christopher reflected, we needed this entire journey to become the people capable of living the love we live today. Maybe true love isn't about finding the right person at the right time, but rather about growing together until you become the right people for each other. At 70 years old, Christopher and Catherine had become almost mythical figures in the world of leadership and business management. Their ideas were studied in universities, their methods were applied in companies of all sizes, and their personal story inspired couples around the world. But for them, the greatest success was the family they had built. Ethan and Chloe were raising the next generation of humanistic leaders through the Next Generation Leadership Institute. The grandchildren grew up in an environment where values like empathy, integrity, and service came naturally. "You know what the most impressive thing is?" Catherine commented one Sunday afternoon, watching the grandchildren play in the garden. "What?" "How our story multiplied. Every person who was touched by our work created their own version of transformation." "That's the true meaning of legacy," Christopher agreed. "It's not about being remembered, but about planting seeds that continue to sprout long after we're gone. And about having the humility to know we did our part, but that the story continues with other people. Especially with them," Christopher said, pointing to the grandchildren. At that moment, Lily, now 15 years old, approached them. "Grandpa, Grandma, I'm doing a project on leadership for school. Can I interview you?" "Of course, my dear," Catherine replied. "What questions do you have?" "The first one is, what was the most important moment in your lives?" Christopher and Catherine looked at each other and smiled. "It was a rainy night, over 50 years ago," Christopher began. "When your grandmother had the courage to knock on my door and speak a truth that changed everything," he continued. "What truth?" Lily asked, curious. "That accepting professional losses is possible, but losing important people is unacceptable," Catherine explained. "And what's the most important lesson you learned?" "That true love and true leadership are based on the same thing," Christopher replied. "What's that?" "Serving the well-being of others," Catherine finished. "And that when you find someone willing to grow alongside you, there's no limit to the good you can do together," Christopher added. Lily wrote everything down carefully in her notebook. "One last question. If you could give one piece of advice to young people my age, what would it be?" Christopher and Catherine thought for a moment. "Have the courage to be vulnerable," Catherine said. "The moments when you admit you don't know everything or need help are the moments you grow the most. And never underestimate the power of a brave decision made out of love," Christopher added. "Sometimes, a choice that seems small can change not only your life, but the lives of thousands of people. Like Grandma going to Grandpa's house that night? Exactly like that." End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this story and where you're watching us from. If you have something to share with us, leave it in the comments with sincere words. Do you believe Catherine made the right decision on that rainy night? We'd love to read your opinion on this journey of love and transformation.